In life, we all make mistakes. And in fantasy football, and really fantasy sports in general, that seems to happen more often than not. So today we're going to discuss the 8 worst fantasy draft busts of the last decade. The criteria I did for the list is guys that were coming in with serious hype, drafted super early, and ended up just not panning out. A couple of them were injuries. I left those near the bottom of the list, but let's get to it. Starting us off at number 8 is 2016 Rob Gronkowski. After finishing 9th in overall player value in 2015, the hype for Gronk was real. He was coming off back-to-back years with at least 1,100 yards and 11 touchdowns. So justifiably, many fantasy owners were willing to challenge the norm and take the tight end at the end of the first round, as he had an average draft position of 1.11. But Gronk battled numerous injuries, appearing in only 8 games that season and finishing as the 22nd ranked tight end. It was the highest average draft position, but the worst statistical season of his future Hall of Fame career. So word to the wise, don't draft a tight end in the first round. Coming in at number 7 is 2011 Jamaal Charles. Jamaal Charles dealt with various injuries throughout his career, but perhaps none more devastating than 2011. In 2010, Charles finished 4th in overall player value, had just under 2,000 scrimmage yards, and 8 combined touchdowns. So he came into 2011 as a consensus top 5 pick and promptly tore his ACL in week 2 of that season. But he did reward anybody who was willing to take a chance on him the following 3 years. At number 6, we have the muscle hamster himself, 2013 Doug Martin. In 2012, Doug Martin put together one of the greatest rookie seasons for a running back in NFL and fantasy history. He finished the season with 1,454 yards with 11 touchdowns, good for 263 total fantasy points. That was 2nd overall, just behind league MVP Adrian Peterson. So in 2013, Martin went 2nd in most fantasy drafts, once again behind Adrian Peterson, and he did not deliver. Through the first 6 games of 2013, Martin had only 1 game in which he eclipsed the 100-yard rushing mark and 1 total touchdown before tearing his labrum in his shoulder and being shut down for the rest of the year. At number 5, we have another guy from 2013, Trent Richardson. We all know Richardson for his inability to exploit a hole in the offensive line, but in 2012, his rookie year, he was actually one of the better backs in the league. He finished with 950 yards rushing and 11 touchdowns, good for 204 fantasy points. That was 9th at his position and 17th overall. So heading into 2013, he looked like a young star on the rise, and most fantasy owners were happy to take him at the end of the first round. Richardson got off to a slow start, and the 0-2 Browns did the most Browns thing ever, or so we thought at the time. They traded their up-and-coming running back to the Colts for a future first-round pick. At the time, this stunned the entire football world, but the Browns must have saw something no one else did.
Indianapolis Colts. Honestly, I have a hard time saying it. It's kind of hard to believe that a team would trade a rookie running back, a guy that last year, he's in his 2nd season, but last year did so much for that team.
But Richardson was terrible with the Colts, lost a starting job by week 12, and was out of the league after 2014. Good job, Browns. The Browns made sure to screw everything up and used the extra pick to draft Johnny Manziel. Ah, man, the poor Browns. Such a shame. Dropping in at number 4 is 2015 Eddie Lacy. This should tell you all you need to know about Eddie Lacy.
Eddie's about 2 cheeseburgers away from handing his hand in the dirt right next to me.
At this point, it's pretty well documented that Lacy was fat, for lack of a better term, but he was actually one of the better running backs in his first 2 years in the league. In each of his first 2 years, he eclipsed 1,100 yards rushing and had double-digit touchdowns from scrimmage, which obviously translated well over to fantasy, as he was the 6th ranked running back each year and finished with a top 7 overall player ranking in 2014. With such a high-powered offense with arguably the best quarterback in the league, Lacy was being drafted at the beginning of the first round, and some people even took him 1st overall in 2015. But Lacy dealt with numerous injuries, probably because he was out of shape, finished with less than 800 yards rushing and only 3 rushing touchdowns for the season.
I just think it's funny sometimes. You heard me screaming, "Run, fat boy, run." Run, fat boy, run.
Run, fat boy, run! Run, fat boy, run! There you go!
Oh man, what could have been? Number 3, 2019, Ronald Ocean, aka Mr. Big Chest, aka Antonio Brown. A man of many names and many hairstyles, was also one of many accolades. Love him or hate him, the guy is Hall of Fame talent, and he was headed to be one of the greatest wide receivers of all time, really before last season. His numbers speak for themselves, as he was surely headed for a gold jacket, until he forced his way out of Pittsburgh, and then he forced his way out of Oakland. Then he got cut by New England, and now he's trying to get back in the league. And that's what led him to number 3 on this list, because the previous 5 years he was top 3 as a receiver, was the number 1 fantasy player in 2015, and had numerous top 10 finishes in overall player value. But all jokes aside, hopefully he can get his things together so we can see more of this, and more of this. Before we get to number 2, here's a couple honorable mentions. First honorable mention is 2012 Larry Fitzgerald. His decline from 2011 to 2012 was significant. He went from 1,411 yards with 8 touchdowns in 2011 to 798 yards and 4 touchdowns in 2012. And from a fantasy perspective, he dropped from the 5th ranked receiver to the 41st. Unfortunate to see for a guy who was a late first round, early second round draft pick in most fantasy leagues. But Larry Legend gets a pass, as he's dealt with some awful quarterbacks. Our second and last honorable mention is 2016 Todd Gurley. Gurley had a terrific rookie season in 2015, finishing with 1,100 yards rushing and 10 touchdowns, good for 5th overall at the running back position in fantasy. But in 2016, he came back down to earth, where he finished with less than 900 yards. He dropped from the 5th ranked running back in 2015 to the 20th ranked running back in 2016. He's left off the list because he posted decent numbers with an abysmal offense, but he's a mention because he didn't live up to his draft positioning. Fortunately for the Rams, Sean McVay came in, and Gurley dominated the next 2 years. Alright, back to the list. At number 2, we have 2014 Adrian Peterson. Adrian Peterson is one of the greatest fantasy football players and NFL running backs to ever grace the earth. But in 2014, something happened that nobody could have predicted. Everything was normal heading into the year. AP was the number 1 pick in most fantasy leagues. There was no injury concern, nothing at all. He even played week 1 and rushed for 75 yards. But then 5 days later, he was indicted on child abuse charges.
What the fuck?
The league carried this case on for as long as they could, and Peterson ended up being suspended for the rest of the season, only giving fantasy owners 1 game of football. On the bright side, he did get reinstated the following season, and he went right back to his dominating ways. Before we get to number 1, I ask you guys to subscribe, because I'm new, and I need it. Thanks. Alright, number 1, 2018, LeVeon Bell. When LeVeon Bell is healthy, he's arguably the best running back in the league, or at least he was. But in 2018, health wasn't necessarily the issue. It was all about money. Bell was insanely productive when he was healthy. In 2017, he was the 2nd ranked player in all of fantasy, which was the 2nd time in his short career that he's done that. So when the Steelers slapped the franchise tag on him in March of that offseason, Bell was not happy, and he refused to sign. Neither side would budge, and the holdout carried on throughout the entire season, as Bell didn't play a single snap in 2018. Heartbreaking for those who took him 1st overall in their fantasy drafts. Thanks for watching, guys. Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment if you got an idea for a new list, if you're one of these people who made these mistakes, or if you hated the video. Have a good one, guys.